Hey, this is Tuesday, February 7th, otherwise known as Happy Mrs. Carmen Day. Let's see, we talked about the speeches, but if you weren't here, you missed my little things. I got to talk about that one, so it's the joy of being dead. Let's see, old book reports. If you're not here today, you're out of luck because they're going to disappear by the time you come back. I will talk about speeches more tomorrow. They officially begin Monday. And let's see, for those of you who are gone, we'll cross these out directions. If your notebook was left here, I did this stuff for you because my heart's full of love. Except for this part, you're going to have to copy the notes on your own because I'm not that nice. You have to put the notes into your new table of contents. Let's see, those of you, we didn't get very far into it, but let's see. Take writing utensil, put it into this page, close notebook around it, and we'll see how much knowledge is in your head, and then we'll get to some of our little stories. Let's see, so I know we got to the fact that we have 3 types of fables. Tanvi, what type of fable has been around the longest, the oldest, forever and ever and ever ago? It is not only like traditional, it is traditional. The traditional, which is the old-timey stuff, where I gave you guys the story about the whatever it was and whatever it was. And then we did get to the second one from there. Sopico, what was our second type of fable that we got into? It starts with a V.
Oh. I don't remember how to pronounce it.
What do you mean? You don't remember how to pronounce it?
You know how to spell it?
It's French.
Oh, I was just checking to see if that was an interesting misdirection. It made me smile. How about this? It starts with a V and it ends with Urs. Nice done. You pronounced it correctly. Go you. And so we got to the verse fable. And then from the move, how is a verse fable written that makes it different than the traditional one?
Like poetry?
Nice. Not just like poetry.
It is poetry.
Way to channel your inner potpourri. And so it is written out as a poem. Did we get to the third one with you?
Yes.
Yay. And the third one is? Modern. And I introduced you to a scientific term, which is?
Today stuff.
Nicely done. Today stuff. Was this the one I did not get a chance to finish with you?
No, you were at the squirrel talking to the cheerleaders, and the turtle's like almost
Gotcha. So we were almost, alright, so I'll finish out the rest. And yeah, it wasn't the squirrel talking to the cheerleaders. The cheerleaders were squirrels. It's so embarrassing. How do you mess that up? So anyway, to finish that one out, to give it forward, we have the rabbit on the track team talking to the squirrel cheerleaders with flipping their little tails, and the turtle's running around doing his little thing, when all of a sudden the squirrel cheerleader's like, hey, I think that one guy that you're making fun of is getting ready to finish. The rabbit turns around and is like, oh, carrots! And takes off running, again, cussing in rabbitese, and then takes off running as fast as he can, and goes around the track, pushing people out of his way, as rabbits do, and then gets all the way to the finish line, and again, leaps for it, and then the turtle just does like a little with his head, same thing worked last time, and finishes right in front of the rabbit, and the rabbit slides across the dirt, and as he does, the turtle then pulls out his phone and records him sitting there, and then turns around, does like a selfie, and and like laughing at him, just like that, and then posts it to social media and gets suspended. And we find out that the moral of the story is you should never bully other children. Or slow and steady wins the race. Whichever one works best for you. So that becomes our 3 types of fables. Traditional versus modern. The main thing every fable has to have is a moral. If it does not have a moral, it does not qualify as a fable, which is going to connect to my next little story. Here's where you get to open up the notebooks again to make sure the stuff is in there. Now, those of you who remember way back during short stories, we talked about morals because it connected to a theme. What is a moral
Theme
then?
is the lesson you learned.
Not the theme. It connects to the theme. Nicely done. You guys were all good at
Lesson.
You learn.
So it's going to be either the lesson learned, or it can be advice, or an observation on human nature. So it could be a lesson learned, like the kid who tries to sleep during notes loses lots of B points. That could be a lesson that you learn. Advice, I would never try to sleep while a teacher is staring at you. An observation on human nature. Grumpy teachers on Tuesdays like to charge points from kids who try to sleep. So any of those would be along those same lines of stuff that you would try to learn. Oh, she's well aware. She's just making her face. See?
Well, I thought you were talking to him. I didn't think you noticed yet.
How adorable. So, here's the other part of one of the stories I realized I forgot to pass along to you. Why we have fables in the first place, and why we're choosing to get into them here. So, we're going to have to get into our Wayback Machine and do a little time traveling. Way back into the past, before we had school. And yes, there is a time in human history before we had school. At this time, we used to have villages and people running around, and it sounds like a wonderful time, except we had this thing called rampant stupidity, where the people just grew up being absolute morons because there was nothing to teach them. So imagine we're in one of these villages back in the day, and we have this group of kids running around, and they've invented a new game called Headsy Smashies. And here's how Headsy Smashies works. You take the biggest rock you can, and you go over to your friend, and you whack them in the head with your rock. If they die, they lose. If they don't die, they score a point. And it becomes the raging new game that all these kids are excited about. But the old people see the kids running around playing Headsy Smashies. They're like, what are you doing? And the kid's like, smash! Loser! Playing Headsy Smashies. And the adults are like, oh my God, you have to stop doing that. Problem is, what happens when adults speak and kids are there to listen?
They don't.
Exactly. And so when the adults say, you can't play Headsy Smashies, the kid's like, smash! Another loser. You can't stop me, old person. So the adults realize we have to stop them. If not, we're going to run out of children. Which at first seems like a good idea. But then the drawback is you also run out of old people eventually. So the old people have to find a way to get the kids to stop playing Headsy Smashies. So their first thing is, let's start telling the kids to stop doing it. And they go, hey, kids, stop doing that. But as we know, does that method work?
Never.
Of course not. The kid's like, okay, smack! Oh, a winner. And so they realize that this method isn't going to work. So then an old man in the town comes up with a plan. He goes, hey, kid. The kid's like, yeah. And he goes, wait. The kid's like, why? He goes, have you ever heard the story of the monkey and the rhinoceros? And the kid's like, I have not. He goes, well, before you continue the game, allow me to tell you the story about a young monkey and his friend the rhinoceros. And the kid's like, go on. And the old man tells the story. He goes, so one day there was a little monkey and he had a friend, the rhinoceros. And they decided to come up with a game called Headsy Smashies. And the kid's like, I love that game. The guy's like, I know. He goes, so here's how it worked. He picked up a big rock, went over to his rhinoceros friend, and smacked him in the head. And the rhinoceros' skull was so hard, he just giggled. And the monkey thought it was the best game in the world. And the kid's like, it is the best. And the kid's like, I know. And so eventually he went around playing this game, and he found his friend, the ladybug. And he goes over to the ladybug, and he goes, Ladybug, you want to play my new friend game? And the ladybug's like, yes, I do. And so the monkey takes the big rock, and he goes, smash! And the ladybug died. And the kid's like, oh, no! And he's like, I know. And he learned that you should never play Headsy Smashies?
Dare you?
Sorry, I forgot the name of my made-up game. Headsy Smashies with people because sometimes their heads are not strong, and you'll kill your friends. And the kid's like, oh, that's a great story. Do you have more? And the old man goes, yes. And he starts telling other stories. And this became our first version of school, was old people tricking kids into learning by telling them stories.
Just like you do.
Because they realize if you just tell a kid to do a thing, they go, blah, 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 boomer, whatever. And it didn't work. Especially back then, when they're like, what's a boomer? And they go, I don't know, but 2,000 years from now, we're going to figure it out. And so they decided to start tricking kids into learning using fables. Google.
Was that old man Aesop?
No, but we're going to talk about him in a moment.
What?
So now we get into the 5 things that make a fable a fable. So as they started figuring out this whole telling kids stories thing, they realized that certain things worked better than others. And they sort of refined it down to 5 main characteristics, or 5 rules that work into it. The first most important thing that you have to have in a fable. Well, why is it these fables exist?
To bring kids joy.
To learn.
To teach a lesson.
Kids don't murder.
To learn. So if a kid's going to learn, what's the most important thing?
Fables
Teach you stuff.
Has to have a moral. If it doesn't have a moral, it's not a fable. So if you ask me about, like, is Goldilocks a fable? It doesn't teach anything. It teaches you not to hang out with a bear. No, that's just a random thing.
It
to
teaches
learn.
not to steal.
Oh, it also teaches you not to yell at your teacher. Oh, that's a different story. And so that makes it not a fable. It's just like the nursery rhymes are not going to be fables. Like, what about Hickory Dickory Dock? Nope, not going to be a fable. It has to end. Now, once again, we have more things coming, but it has to fit all 5 of these to qualify. 2, Once we started telling stories to the kids, we realized oftentimes they would tune out the old people when they started to talk. You had to have a certain type of character to get the kids' attention.
Aminals.
Because the first couple of times, like, hey, let me tell you a story about this old man named Gertie and this old woman named Hannah. Like, no, bored already. Like, how about I tell you a story about a dolphin? And the kid's like, I'm listening. He goes, and a cricket. And the kid's like, I'm in. So they realized if you want a kid to pay attention, you have to use animals as your characters. You cannot use people because kids tune you out and start ignoring you. Mr. Brovicast, I'm already ignoring you. I know, that's why I keep charging the girl points.
What?
I didn't use a name. It could be any girl just laying her head down, not writing
You
stuff.
said girl and Rosie was like,
Google.
Does that mean if you wear an animal outfit or something, we'll pay attention to you?
Oh, yeah.
Is that your way of saying you need to borrow one? Is you're going to give me a shoe?
No.
Do you still charge me points?
Well, yes, because you waited till now to figure it out.
No, but it worked before, but then I got...
Show me what you wrote down earlier. Yeah, that was yesterday.
write the way down.
That was a
Oh,
good
it's
try.
because my pencil broke. No, but it was working earlier. It was working in English comp. Thanks.
You're welcome.
I'm not wearing fun stuff.
Aww.
Stole someone's shoe.
No stealing! Think about Goldilocks.
If only there was a story about that. Let me tell you the story about the grumpy old bear and the little monkey who could... So now, moving on from there. You're welcome. Now you get to write stuff down. Number 3 in our rules, the thing that go into it, we also realize that if we're going to keep kids learning through this, we have to have them pay attention all the way from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. So how long should our stories be? Short. Exactly. Because it turns out that kids have the attention span of a butterfly. So if you want them to learn your moral at the end, you have to get to it quickly. You can't be like, hey, you shouldn't hit those kids in the head with a rock. Like, why not? Like, I've got a story. Sit down. It's going to take 4 hours. You've already lost the kid. So you have to make sure that you get to the end of it really speedily. So it should be brief or short. Unlike me and my babbling, most fables should only take you like a minute to 2 minutes to get through. Unlike mine, but I like to throw in details and talking because it makes me happy. Moles.
Why do you call them short stories? Oh my god, I'm so sorry.
Short. Because they're not fables. Fables are even shorter. Number 4. Our next one is we found out as we were telling kids the stories and we had our animals, we were teaching them a thing, we were fairly short. Every once in a while, one of the old people would try to tell a story, but it ended up being a little on the boring side. And it turns out kids don't like boring things. I know. Shocker. So it turned out the more humor or funny you could add to it, the better off it was going to be. Now, it doesn't mean it has to be like a knock-knock joke the entire way through, but you're going to try to avoid sadness. You're not going to start off being like, I'm going to tell you about the whale who had cancer. And the kid's like, oh, that's not going to work at all. Now, given some of you have issues and you immediately got excited, but for the rest of humanity, probably doesn't work out that way. So you're going to try and aim more for the funny area than the depressing area. And finally, thing number 5, at what age do people stop being stupid?
Never.
Exactly. So it turned out when they started telling these stories, when they were doing the story about not hitting people in the head with rocks, when they were telling the story to these kids, random other adults would walk by and like, really? I shouldn't hit my friend in the head with the rocks? Like, yes, 30-year-old man. They're like, huh, learned something new. So it turned out the fables need to be enjoyed by people of all ages because you're never too old to be an idiot. And if you're unsure about that, you can Google it. There's this thing called the internet, which is full of idiots. Go to any web page, find the discussion comments area, and go, holy moly, they're all over the place.
Florida man.
yeesh.
Or you can just take a sit. And
Eeks.
Does that mean you're an idiot?
Yeah, I'm human.
My
I put up with you guys every day.
Shut up!
Now, some of you are going to run out of room because you're big writers, and so if that happens, you're going to need to go to the next page because I have more learning coming in just a moment. So those of you who are smaller writers, it might work out, but if you turn page, date, title, not the first time we played this. So now that you understand sort of the idea of how fables work, let's go to There is a guy who is known as the father of fables, who became the most famous of all the fabulists.
It's soup.
Shakespeare.
Aesop.
Jamaica.
A-E-S-O-P. Aesop.
I think I've heard of that.
By the way, a person who tells fables, their official name is a fabulous. I wish I was making that up, but a person who tells fables is a fabulous. Like it, I know. You're all fabulous to
Aesop is
me.
fabulous.
He is. Aesop was the original fabulous person.
Yeah.
Now,
Fab.
for those of you who pay attention to the news, he died just a few years ago, 620 to 560 BC. I remember him when I was a kid.
Oh, I thought it was
So Aesop, that was his whole name. It was not like Aesop Aesop. It was just that one single name, and that was it. And Aesop grew up in this place called Africa, and he was a wee child there. And he was one of those random kids who just paid attention when the old people spoke. I know. They're rare. And so happened to be when the old people would tell all these stories, he just happened to pay attention and listen to them. Well, one day, as a child, he's hanging out in his little village when these random new people showed up who looked completely different from him. They were Greeks. And Greeks like to go out to other countries and sort of conquer them. The Greeks liked fighting. It brought them happiness. Whenever the Greeks conquered a country, they took slaves. But their slavery was not race-based. Their slavery was just, when we conquer you, we're going to give you two choices. Either A, we can kill you, or B, you can come back and be a slave. And they're like, we're happy either way, it's up to you. And so they were like, slave or death? I'm like, death. Done. Slave or death? Like, slave? Done. And so you'd come back and be a slave. With the Greeks, though, their slavery was not forever. You were only a slave until you proved that you were worthy to be a citizen. So you could work your way out of being a slave. So it was like you'd come back, you'd work as a slave, and then eventually the people you were working for was like, hey, you've done enough work, you've proven that you're a citizen, you would earn your freedom. So, with Aesop, his village eventually gets taken over by these Greeks who show up and randomly bring a piece of paper to their class. Oh, you're a library aide. Come here. So the Greeks show up, they go through the village, they're asking each person, slavery or death, slavery or death, and they get to Aesop, and he's like, I'm going to take the not death option. They're like, good choice. Right, you're going to come back and you're going to be a slave with us. He goes back to Greece and ends up living there for the next several years, from being a wee child listening to all those stories, till eventually he learns how to speak Greece, working on a farm. One day, Greekian? I don't know, words are hard. Greekian, I got it. So one day, he's hanging out on this farm, and he sees these other little Greekian children running around, and one of them picks up a big rock and goes running over to his friend. And Aesop's like, what are you? And the kid's like, whack! And hits his friend in the head, and the kid drops to the ground. Aesop's like, oh my Greeks, what are you doing? And he goes over to the kid, he's like, what happened? He's like, oh, there's this awesome new game we heard about called Roxy Headsies, and we're going to try and play it. He's like,
Heads and smashies.
Heads and smashies. Well, no, in Greeks they had a different name for it. And so Aesop sees this happen. He's like, whoa, haven't you ever heard the story about the monkey and the rhinoceros? And the kid's like, I have not. He's like, well, put the rock down and let me tell you the story. So Aesop tells the kid the story about how the monkey and the rhinoceros and stuff like that. And the kid's like, that's fascinating. He goes, hey, old man. Because Aesop was in his 20s, and to a kid in your 20s, you're an old person. He's like, hey, old man, do you have any more stories like that? And he's like, yeah. Have you ever heard the story of the grasshopper and the dolphin? And the kid's like, I have not. And so he starts telling that story. The kid found it fascinating. Realized this was only a few years before Netflix came out. So kids had nothing to do besides listen to old people and hit each other in the head with rocks. So when they started telling a story, they're like, ooh, that's more fun than hitting someone in the head with a rock. I'm in. So the kid starts listening to the story. The next day, he brings back some of his friends. He's like, hey, old man, I really enjoyed the stories yesterday. Can you tell some of them to my friends? Aesop tells those stories. Those kids like it. And they start bringing other kids to him. And eventually, Aesop starts telling these stories well enough that it gets all the way up to the emperor himself. And the emperor ends up hearing these stories because the emperor is out hanging with his friends one day and he ready to like smack one of his friends in the head with a rock. And his nephew's like, Uncle Emperor, don't hit that kid in the head with a rock. The emperor's like, I can do whatever I want. I'm the emperor. He's like, no. Haven't you ever heard the story of the monkey and the rhinoceros? And the emperor's like, hush your mouth, child. And eventually he finds out about Aesop and he brings Aesop in. And Aesop tells the emperor stories. And the emperor's like, you know what? You need to come work for me. So he brings Aesop in, and Aesop starts telling stories for the emperor and all of the emperor's visiting dignitary friend people. Z's.
How many friends have you smashed with rocks?
Right. Moving on from there. So eventually he gets so good at all of the storytelling that after a few years he manages to get the one thing that all slaves want. And the one thing that all slaves want is food! No, it was a car. Getting his freedom. Eventually, he was able to get his freedom. And so the emperor was speaking to him and was like, hey, you've done a really good job with your whole storytelling. I'm really impressed. You've proved that you are worthy as a citizen. Because of that, I release you and you are now free. Move.
So like when he saw the kid hit his friend and he tells him the story, he just leaves the kid who got hit.
Well, it
He's
depends.
Like,
if the kid was a loser, then you just leave him there.
Well, yeah,
if the kid was a winner, then after they wipe the blood off, he gets to hear the story also. I mean,
so they just like chill, like, okay, just leave your friend. I'm gonna tell you.
Yeah, you know how kids are. They're horrible. Victor,
Did he die?
Slavery in.
when did their slavery?
Why?
Why did it end?
Yeah.
Theirs, because they got beat by other countries. Yeah. So it was good to be a bully until a bigger bully
Yeah,
comes.
but why did why did slavery end in general?
In general, because we really, I mean, in some countries it hasn't. We still have some slavery today.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing. Yeah.
It's not.
No. What? It's not a good thing. Typically, no. We frown on it, but morals, deeds their own. Now, with all of this,
Explain that to me.
once Aesop is freed, and they go, what do you want to do? And Aesop goes, you know what I want to do? Exactly what I've been doing. And so he decides to keep on telling stories. The difference is, now he gets paid for it. And essentially, Aesop makes fat bank and becomes rich and famous throughout all of Greece. Starts holding concerts where instead of going and listening to a person sing, he would just have a big area where people would come down and listen to him tell stories. As these stories continued, after some of his... already got his points, don't worry. As these stories continued, at the end of some of them, what would end up happening was they'd hear the stories in, they'd come find him after his little concert, hey, Aesop, you told a lot of great stories. And he's like, oh, thank you, I really appreciate it. But you didn't tell the story about the giraffe and the kangaroo. And Aesop's like, I don't know the story about the giraffe and the kangaroo. Would you like us to tell it to you? And he's like, yeah. And they would tell him the story. He would then reuse that story the next time he had a concert. For those of you who have had your English comp class, you know there's a word for that. Essentially, Aesop was the very first famous plagiarist. All of these stories he's known for telling, he did not create. They were ones that he stole from other people, which is what that big thing says. Essentially, he stole all of his stories from other people. He wasn't some genius that created them. What he was a genius at doing was storytelling. And so he was a good storyteller. And people would just give him stories, and they just got excited. Whenever he would retell their story, they didn't get upset about it. They're like, oh my God, he used my story, yay! And so they would happily give him the stories so that he could reuse them and sort of gift them that way. So, Pico,
Do you have to write all of that down, or can you just say stole all stories from other
it is up to you. As long as you know it when it comes time for the homework and the quiz, you can just write down Aesop good, yo. And if that doesn't help you for the quiz, that's a you choice. Z's.
Is he the little boy that started smashing rocks and then the old man told him that story?
So now,
Yeah.
Aesop at this point is going around telling stories, doing really well for himself. And it gets to the point where Greece gets into another war. Unsurprisingly, it's one of those things that Greece really likes to do. Yeah, go help a new kid. Go help a new kid. In this big war, at the end of it, Delphi is one of the city-states that's in Greece. And Delphi ends up helping Greece win the war. And at the end of it, the emperor wants to help out Delphi. He's like, all right, here's what I want to do. because the Delphinians, the people from Delphi, helped us win the war. They had like the best warriors, were all like fierce and stabby. He goes, I want to give the whole city-state of Delphi a gift. And he talks to his advisors. They go, here's what we think you should do. Send a bag of gold to Delphi. And you're going to give 5 pieces of gold to every single person in that whole city-state. He's like, all right, I think I can agree to that. Like, on top of that, have Aesop deliver it. And then Aesop's going to give them the gold and then tell them the stories. And he's like, genius. It's like buying a concert ticket. When you go there, they not only have the concert, then they give you money at the end of the concert. You're like, it's like the best gift ever. So he goes, sounds like a great idea. So he goes and talks to Aesop. He's like, Aesop, will you do me this solid? Will you go and deliver this gold to Delphi and then tell them stories afterwards? And Aesop's like, absolutely. Sounds like a blast. I'm in. So they give Aesop this giant bag of gold, put it in the back of the wagon, and they send him off to Delphi.
And he's dead.
Well, not yet. I mean, eventually, yes. It was up there. And so he gets to Delphi, and he shows up in this city-state with his wagon and his bag of gold, and he stands up. He's like, my name is Aesop. I'm like, woo, stories. He's like, I know. He goes, here's what I'm here to do. I want to give out 5 pieces of gold to every person in this entire village because you guys helped us win the war, and the city-state of Delphi was the most impressive. Your warriors did the most. The emperor says we would not have won without you. And so what I'm going to need you to do is line up. You're going to come forward. We're going to give you the 5 pieces of gold. We're going to mark your hand. And then once we've gone through everybody, I'm going to have a giant storytelling thing. You guys all get to come together. And they're like, yay, storytelling. He's like, I feel the same way. So they get into a big line. He gets ready to start handing out the gold. Before he starts, a bunch of the warriors who fought in the battle come forward. And they go, Mr. Aesop, sir. He's like, it's just Aesop. I go, Aesop, we have a problem with what you're doing. He goes, how would you have a problem with me giving you gold? They go, here's our issue. You're giving 5 gold to everybody in this village. He goes, well, yeah. You go, well, we went out and did all the fighting and the stabbing and the bleeding and the scary bits and stuff like that. Tommy over here only has 1 leg. And so we feel it's really only fair at the end of all of this that really we should probably get like 6 pieces of gold and everybody else in the town should get 4 pieces of gold because they would not be getting any of this without our hard work. We're really the ones that did all the stuff, so we should get the extra money. He's like, oh, well, I guess that's a good point. Allow me. And before he can continue, the women stand up and they go, Aesop, sir. He's like, it's just Aesop. They go, Aesop, we also have a problem. He's like, what problem do you have? The women go, well, here's our issue. The guys went out there and did the fighty stabby thing, but it turns out guys like doing fighty stabby things. It sort of brings them happiness. So they're out basically just camping in the woods, stabbing their friends. And everyone knows that Tom over here was born with 1 leg. That doesn't even count. And so we had to stay behind and raise all the children, which were like a bunch of little crazed rugrats. So really, we did all the hard work while they got to have a good time. So if anything, the women should be getting 7 pieces of gold, and everyone else should be getting 3 pieces of gold because we did the hard work, and they got to go out camping and have fun. And so the warriors and the women start yelling back and forth. And Aesop's like, oh, wait a minute. And then all of a sudden, the farmers raise their hand. The farmers go, we have an issue also. And Aesop's like, oh my God. He's like, what issue do you guys have? They go, well, here's our issue with all of this. While they were out doing stabby in the woods, having a good time, and while the women were raising their own rugrats that they brought into this world, we had to give up our crops so that they wouldn't die. And we didn't get paid for all those crops. So we sacrificed for all these other people and made no money on it. So really the farmers should be getting 8 pieces of gold and everyone else should be getting 2 pieces of gold to even out all the money that we lost. So all 3 groups start yelling at each other. The farmers, the women, and the warriors.
Aesop just takes it all.
Aesop raises his hands like, listen. Can't you all just agree that you all did something and together you did this amazing thing and because of that you all deserve the 5 pieces of gold? And they go, no, you have to decide for us. He's like, okay. All right, I've got it. Allow me to help educate you. And they're like, yay, education. He goes, all right, follow me. Picks up the bag of gold. Throws it back into his little wagon. He goes, come after me. And they go, okay. And he starts leading them outside of town. And the whole town follows him out. And he leads them on this little path that goes to this lake that... Tomorrow we'll pick up and find out about the lake. Bye, Mrs. Carmen.
They drowned him into